All right, what up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Living the Dream podcast. Today on the show, we have Marci Brockmann, who is an author, teacher, and host of the Permission to Heal podcast. Marci, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Fantastic. Thanks for asking. And we like
Excellent.
to jump right in. So if you
Yeah,
could start with telling us a little bit more about yourself and what you like to do for fun, that'd be great.
I have a lot of trouble with fun. I'm a person who has always battled with workaholism. I find a lot of my own personal meaning and value in work that I do, and I devote too much time to it because I sort of forget how to have fun. I create art for fun, but to other people on the outside, that looks like more work. You know, Fun. I like movies, and my husband and I lately have been watching too much TV because it's too hot to go outside, and I'm exhausted. I don't know. I love getting together with friends in small groups and having really meaningful conversations. To me, that's really fun. And spending time with my adult children and our grandkids is super fun, but I don't see them often. And so about me, I for the last 27 years have been a public high school English teacher in a suburban school district on Long Island in New York, which I have adored since the very beginning of my career. I started my podcast, Permission to Heal, in November of 2020 after publishing my book, Permission to Land, Searching for Love, Home, and Belonging, and was looking for more ways to connect my message of self-empowerment and the value of mental and emotional health to a larger audience. And then suddenly I was just struck like a lightning bolt with this idea to start the podcast in November of 2020. And it's just been phenomenal. Phenomenal. So, I had a history growing up. I was an English, and I was an only child growing up in a very dysfunctional family. My dad has always been a narcissist, and that aside worked like 99 jobs to keep the family afloat. And my mom was basically an undiagnosed bipolar who self-medicated with opiates at the end, but a whole lot of psychotropic medicine along the way that changed her personality. And so growing up with her as my primary caretaker, I never felt emotionally safe. Let's just put it that way. And I grew up feeling like my only value was through service to others, in doing things for my mom in any way that I could affect her mood, which wasn't all that. I mean, I was a kid, so there wasn't much that I could do. But I grew up with this notion that I had to do anything and everything that I could to keep her happy, because when she was in her Mary Poppins mood, as I put it when I was a little girl, I felt safer and my world was better. But when she went into the dark Cruella de Vil place, life sucked.
Yeah.
So, even as a young adult and an adult, forming romantic relationships and eventually getting married and starting my own family, this was still the toxic template that I had carried with me. I had established every single meaningful relationship I'd ever had on the same template that I had learned from my mom, that what I wanted and what I needed was irrelevant. And I had to do and make myself into anything that the other person wanted, because that was the way to keep them happy and therefore keep me safe. And it's a disastrous way to live your life. Absolutely disastrous way to live my life. And I had been in therapy. I've now been in therapy for more than 20 some odd years. I have been keeping journals since 1983 and have used journal writing and drawing and painting as a way of figuring out, working my way through, processing, figuring out how I felt about things. And it really was my saving grace. I think I would have not turned out so well without expressive writing and art therapy that I self-administered without knowing what I was doing. So that's the long and the short of it, really.
I gotcha. And so Tell us a little bit more about the podcast. Like, is it just you talking? Are you having guests on? Is it a mix?
Oh, it's all guests. It's all guests. I have a lot of knowledge from life experience and a lot of research and 3 master's degrees and a whole heck of a lot of life behind me. But I always want to learn more things. So I have guests on every week who are therapists and coaches and entrepreneurs and survivors of all sorts of trauma. Everything from nutrition and herbalism to psychoanalysis and music therapy to people who are coaches in all sorts of aspects of living a brilliant life. And each week we learn from them. That's the best thing I can do, is amplify other people who are doing the things that inspire and motivate all of us to be our best selves. And the concept of permission to heal the concept of giving ourselves permission works its way through all of my writing, including my memoir and the companion journal, which are called Permission to Land, that came from an earlier piece of writing that I did in 2015, where I was so disconnected from the life I was living, from the choices I was making, that I wrote in an article that I had published on Elephant Journal that I felt like an airplane endlessly circling an airport waiting for permission to land. I didn't feel like I was really in my life. Forget balance. I was watching myself almost like an out-of-body experience, trying to figure out how to go about making myself happy. But I hadn't figured out that the permission, the impetus, the agency to do that wasn't coming from some amorphous external force. The only way to make any of that happen was to look inward, because it was all inside me from the beginning. And that the only person who had, or continues to have, any effect or change on my life at all is me, ultimately. And that no matter what I want to do or try or become or create or experience, it is all up to me to make that happen. And I didn't learn that lesson until 2015. So I was in my later 40s. So, part of the permission concept was to share that in awakening, that enlightenment with anyone else who would listen, who could benefit from it. So my memoir, Permission to Land, looks at this whole healing journey through the lens of me healing from the relationship from my mom. And so although it's obviously my story, the emotional aspects of it are so universal that I think everybody who reads it can find a piece of themselves in the text, in the book. And then the podcast is just an outgrowth of that sort of occurred to me like a lightning bolt a few months later. So yeah, it's one of the most rewarding experiences of my life, recording this podcast. You're a podcaster, you learn from the guests, they light up your life. They teach you things, or even just phrase things in a slightly different way than you thought of before. And I think it changes my life every week when I get to interview these people. And I hope that the audience, that my listeners feel the same way. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that. It's why I ask some of the same questions. There's some questions that are close to my heart, and every now and then you get a unique answer that makes you think of it a different way.
Exactly.
So I really like that.
Exactly.
Well, awesome. Tell us about your motivation. What gets you up and keeps you going every day?
What keeps me going every day? During the school year, it's my students. I love teaching, and I teach 11th and 12th grade English. So they're, 16, 17, 18-year-old kids. And they're really at the cusp of like the end of their childhood and the beginning of their young adulthood. And I remember how many questions I had about myself and the whole universe, and trying to grapple with that, with my sense of identity. Who the hell am I? And what did I want? And where was I going? And how do I become an adult and leave behind the innocence or the dependency of childhood, and so I just love helping these kids figure it out. So they really keep me going during the year, and that concept of being helpful, being of good use, being, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, Tim, but helping other people along with their own healing journey is really something that motivates me tremendously. Along with being a good mom to my kids. So, I mean, they live in all of them, with the exception of one, we have 4. One lives here, but in another county, and the other 3 live in different states. And I make it my business to be in contact with them as often as possible because they're my life,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how to answer the question other than that. I think I'm still learning. I think every day is a different thing. And there are some days where I don't want to get out of bed and I just sit in bed and read or, scroll through TikTok for hours. But I think we all have ups and downs and fluctuations in energy and in motivation. But most days I have this very strong desire to use the limited time I have on this planet in a very productive way.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a guest on recently. I was like, what gets you up and keeps you going? He was like, discipline. And I was like, what? That's
I don't understand that as an answer.
But he was saying that motivation is kind of like just a crapshoot. Like some days you wake up and you're like, ooh, let's do it. And then other days you wake up and you're like, wow, I really don't want to do anything. I just want to lay in bed all day. Bruno Mars, today I don't feel like doing anything type of vibes.
Right. But I think that if we are introspective and intuitive about how and listen to our bodies, that our bodies tell us when they need more rest.
Yeah.
And when they have more energy, it's really obvious. And to push yourself to do a full calendar of things when your body is telling you to lay the F down,
yep.
You're not, it's just going to be a fight all day. So where possible, I listen. Today was one of those days, which is why I blew my interview schedule earlier today, but let's not get into that.
All good. All good. Well, awesome. Now we're going to jump into your dreams and goals. So yeah, tell us about your vision for your life and your company.
Okay. Well, I'm going to retire from teaching in about 6 or 7 years. Mm-hmm. And I'm 54 now, so I will be 60. And when I was a young girl, and my grandparents, I think, were this age, I had this concept of them as being old, and now most of the time, if I close my eyes and I think, how old do I feel? I feel about 32.
That's fair.
Doesn't quite reconcile with the 54-year-old I see in the mirror, but that's in a whole other story. But I see my life as a continuing adventure. Like I had short stints in 7 careers before I became a teacher because I couldn't find anything that made me feel alive, that brought meaning to my life, that made me feel like I was doing something worthwhile. Everything else I was bored with and seemed really superficial. So I got myself into teaching and I've loved it. But I'm almost done. We're 7 years, we'll be finished. But then I started thinking this past winter, what am I doing next? I've got the podcast. There's probably another book or 2 inside me that hasn't come out yet. There's a TED Talk, definitely, but it's still amorphous. I don't quite know what the messaging is yet. And so I went back to school just in June. I'm still in my first 2 classes now, to be a licensed mental health counselor. So I'm starting a new career in my late 50s, which, if we follow the old patterns of what life is supposed to look like from the previous generations, this seems ludicrous, or at least it did to me before I started thinking about it differently. But I'm ready to tackle something else new and use the life experience and the knowledge that I have acquired over what will be 6 decades of my life, or actually the completion of 5 decades of my life, if we look at it actually, to helping other people along their own healing journeys in a different way. So that's what I envision. Whether I will start my own practice, which was my original thought, and have that under the Marci Brockmann International umbrella, along with the books and there's an expressive writing course I have on YouTube and the podcast, or I will join an established practice or a combination of both. I don't know yet. And I'm trying not to question the universe's methodologies, because so far when I trust in the path and I don't obsess about where I'm going with it, it really leads me to where I can find my most purpose and my most value. So I think that's my long answer to that question.
I got you. So it's really, how many years? 6 years you're going to retire from teaching?
Yeah.
And then you're going to start a new career as a therapist. And what was the type of therapist?
A licensed mental health counselor.
Licensed mental health counselor. I love it. And so you're kind of still between own practice or kind of hopping on with somebody for those first couple of years. But ultimately, I assume it's kind of like you want your own thing going.
I think so, but I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes.
Absolutely. And I heard another book and a TED Talk in there, right?
Well, there's a TED Talk that's like half, I would say 35 to 40% solid in my head, which is not enough to start planning. I'm still trying to figure that out, and there may be another book or two, but I'm focused and content on what it is I'm doing now. So we'll see how it evolves.
Can you give us the 35% of the TED Talk, or is that exclusive until the stage?
No, it's fine. I mean, 30% is nothing really. I when I was interviewing a mental health counselor, a therapist on my podcast, probably about a year ago. And we were talking about psychotherapy for teenagers, for adolescents. And I was relating my experience when I was about 16, I think, 15 or 16 years old. My parents were in the middle of a very contentious, awful, horrible divorce. They were weaponizing me against each other. And I was in a shitty, awful place. And like I said about my relationship with my mom, it wasn't safe ground for me. And so I had said that I wanted to find a therapist, and she was all too happy to help me find one. But then she insisted on sitting in the room with me when I talked to the therapist. And it wasn't safe for me to say what I actually needed to talk about, because I would have had hell to pay on the way home and at home with my mom. And the counselor wasn't savvy enough to insist that my mother leave, to take the decision out of my hands and just say, you know what, you have to leave, go sit in the waiting room while your daughter and I talk, which is what I needed her to do, but I couldn't even ask her to do that. Now if that happened, I might be savvy enough to email her on the sly and say, this is what I need. But we're talking like the early 80s. Yeah. There was no email that didn't exist yet. So I was just really unsafe. And this woman just did not create a safe place for me to explore what I needed to explore. And ultimately, she just shrugged her shoulders and said to my mom, well, I guess Marci's just not ready to talk yet. And my mother was really frustrated because I was the one who had asked to go to therapy. She didn't understand. So the TED Talk is centered around the concept of making sure that either we give adolescents the space to feel and discover their own identity, or from the counselor's point of view as to what we need to do for the adolescents who come to us in helping them. So it could go either direction, but that's kind of where it's going, I think. It could change direction again. I don't know.
I love it.
But I think it's ultimately really important that we are aware, especially if we're parents or we are the guides of other children in some way, some other kids relationship, in relationship with some other kids, is to really listen to what they're trying to tell us, either through their behavior or their, other nonverbal communication, or what they're actually saying. And I think so many of us, maybe through no fault of our own, maybe it was our own upbringing or the culture in which we came out into the world, or it could be all the responsibilities and financial burdens that grown-ups, that adults have in our world in 2022. There are a myriad of reasons why we don't hear the things we need to hear. And being aware of all of that can help us focus on what they actually need. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there we go. I think it's, I'd call it 38%, 40% of the way there.
Who knows? There's not enough yet. Right. Yeah. I wouldn't even say it's that far, but thank you.
Yeah, I feel like maybe, and this is just me reaching, but would it be, what would take it to 100%? Would it be like a study that you've done on teenagers and how they feel like they have space, or best practices, or would it be like another story or two to kind of corroborate? What would take it to 100%, you think?
I think a combination of that. I think I would have to have had more experience from the counseling end or more research, maybe some more anecdotal stories to sort of help the audience identify with or put themselves in the situation, so that the things that I'm saying actually make sense. You've got to reach your audience and make them want to pay attention. So when I watch other TED Talks, they seem to have more substance than just what I communicated to you. So it needs more substance in some way, whether it's my own experience or it's research or some sort of study I've done. It needs something.
I gotcha. Well, if there were one or two people that you could meet right now, and this could be a specific person or a type of person, and they'd really help you take the next step towards these dreams and goals, who would they be and how would they help you?
Wow, that's a question to answer with no forethought. The first person who comes to mind is Dr. Brené Brown. I've written every single word that she has published, as far as I can tell. I listened to every one of the episodes of both of her podcasts. And I think she has been the instructive catalyst and motivator for a lot of my own mental health growth in the last, 6, 7, 8, 9 years.
Yeah.
And I've messaged her, I've emailed her, I've gotten no response. She lives in Texas, I live in New York. I don't expect a response.
Hey, I live in Texas.
But I've oh, you do?
I can go knock on her door.
Oh, awesome. I don't know if you can, but I've invited her to dinner. If she ever finds herself in New York somewhere, I'll take her to dinner. I would love to see Elizabeth Gilbert, who is an internationally famous writer. She writes about creativity and all sorts of really amazing things. She wrote Eat, Pray, Love. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's made into a movie. She's just really philosophical and brilliant in the things that she says. And I listened to, she wrote a book called, what the heck's it called? Creative Magic or Mad. I'm losing my mind right now, but I listen to this book every single year because it really helps me sharpen my relationship with my own creativity. I would love to meet Glennon Doyle, who's another philanthropist, famous writer, podcaster, and she and her wife and her sister have a podcast, and I listen to that faithfully. And they've also helped me fine-tune my own thoughts about my relationships. And I would love to have the dinner with the four of us. That would be a freaking blast.
So Dr. Brené Brown,
Elizabeth Gilbert,
Elizabeth.
Glennon Doyle.
Okay, Elizabeth
and
Gilbert.
Elizabeth Gilbert.
Gotcha. I love it. I love it. And if there were one or two things that everyday people could do to help you accomplish your dreams, so not them accomplish theirs, but you accomplish yours, what would those one or two things be?
How would they even have access? Tim, how do you answer that question? Everyday people. I just think the answer that I have is compassion and kindness. That I think that more people, if more people related to each other from the standpoint of compassion and kindness, rather than apathy or divisiveness or fear or anger or distrust, that we would all be in a better place in this world. And if we're all be in a better place, then I would be in a better place and they would be in a better place. And I think that it really would help us all get to a healthier, more balanced, happier, more fulfilled place in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a more common answer than you would think. And now we're going to jump into our Thriving Three. The first question
Thriving Three. Okay. I love your pattern here. It's cool.
I appreciate it. What's your favorite book, movie, or podcast? Pick one.
Pick one book, movie, or podcast?
Mm-hmm.
That's a tough question.
Besides this one, of course.
Of course. Can I choose my own?
I mean, yeah, if that's your favorite, go for it.
Yeah, I think the one that brings the most meaning to my life is my own podcast. I mean, I hate to say that, but I listen to a lot of podcasts and I learn a lot of things from a lot of podcasts, but I don't think that I learn as much as I learn from my own, because I'm the one vetting and interviewing the guests, you know? So for me, it's like that firsthand experience with the guest on my podcast who I'm interviewing. If I had to choose another one, it would be Glennon Doyle's podcast, We Can Do Hard Things, because they tackle anything and everything that has to do with life and relationships and our bodies and the patriarchy and everything else, you know, and I learn something every single time I listen to it.
Love it. We can do hard things. And what is one way you like to take care of yourself?
What is one way I like to take care of myself? Well, every single day I do some sort of artwork, whether it's coloring in an adult coloring book or it's just drawing. I do a lot of neurogenic drawing, which is like the style of painting that's behind me. And it's just colorful and free form. And each day it takes on a different kind of mood and color palette. And every day I read. It's the way I go to sleep at night. Because I have one of those brains that has an extremely overactive internal monologue. And if I don't focus on something while I'm trying to fall asleep, I could lay in bed for hours just stewing over 45 different things.
Yep.
So if I focus on a book, and it has to be something nonsensical and ridiculous, like a romance novel. I mean, it's sort of embarrassing, but it's the way it goes. I don't have a whole lot of my intellect invested in it, and then I fall asleep. So those are two ways: making sure I get enough sleep and creating art every day.
There we go. There we go. And what is one action step you can take right now or continue to take if you're already doing it to have dinner with Dr. Brene Brown, Glennon Doyle, and Elizabeth Gilbert at the same table?
Oh, action step, huh?
Yep.
Well, I've already messaged them and emailed them all, but I also know them all well enough from their public personas to know that they're all introverted enough where that's not going to happen. I'd be more effective, I think, getting them on a Zoom call, because then no one actually has to leave their house and they don't have to get dressed if they don't want to. I don't know how to do that. I keep talking about it on social media. I've emailed them, I've messaged them. Maybe as I continue along my journey and refine my own mission and purpose, maybe my messaging and what I say to them will change or evolve.
There we go. You know, you should read this book called Giftology.
Giftology?
Giftology, yep.
Okay.
It's a great book. It is about marketing, but it's about a unique way of marketing that I think you can apply to get them all on a Zoom call with you.
All right, I will look it up.
Yes, it's a good book, and it's like a 2-hour read. I think like it was really so I listened to it in 2 hours. I didn't actually read it. I like to.
Well, if you can listen to it in 2 hours, you could read it in 2 hours.
Yep. That's what you'd like to think. Some people read slower, some people read faster. You know, I had the world's fastest reader on this podcast, and he can read books like literally. He says the only reason it takes me a long time to read a book is because it takes me time to turn the pages. Like he literally just yeah.
How?
I mean, this is so cool. You should actually, if you want to learn how to read faster, which would help you with grad school.
Honestly. Yes.
There's a lot of reading in grad school, but you should go to his website and see if he can teach you some
What's
tips
his name?
and tricks.
Do you know?
I'm really blanking on it right now.
Okay.
But if you Google, I'll Google it right now, world's fastest reader, and he'll come up. But how he does it, Howard Berg is the world's fastest reader. Yes.
B-E-R-G or B-U-R-G?
B-E-R-G.
Okay.
He can read more than 25,000 words per minute.
What?
And the only reason it takes him time is because he has to flip the pages. And how he does it is he's like,
hell? Yeah,
he says, you think in pictures. You don't think in like words. You don't think in text. You think in pictures, right? And so he was like, you need to turn on the movie aspect of your brain, because when you're watching a movie, think about how much information you take in from the screen.
Right.
But then when you're reading, you're only taking in one word at a time. He's like, that's really inefficient. Your brain can do a lot more. So turn on the part of your brain that is watching a movie, and then you can look at a page and see all the words and make sense of them like that. In the same way, I could show you 1 second of a movie clip and you could describe the scenery to me and describe the scene to me. He's saying the same thing can happen with a book. And he actually went and taught kids how to do this. I think it was like 12-year-olds. And he gave them a college textbook. He had them read the textbook in like a week or two. And then all of them aced the test, or like a high percentage of them aced the test, showing that he wasn't some sort of savant, but it was like a skill that humans had where if they honed it, they could read and take in information extremely quickly.
Wow. I'm going to check this guy out and maybe bring it to my high school students in the fall.
You should. He teaches people how to do it on his website. So
wow, that would help a lot.
Yeah. Like, hey, you can do all your homework in 2 minutes now.
2 minutes.
And ace the test. Yeah, super valuable skill. And I feel like he should be more well known. Like, I didn't even know about him. And I'm like, you should be one of the most famous people on the planet because
there's a guy, what's his name? His last name is Quick, believe it or not. I can't remember his first name suddenly. And he is also a speed reader type guy.
Yes, you know, I've seen some ads with him. Let's see. Jim Quick. Yeah. Yeah. Mind Valley is the company.
Mind Valley, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, awesome. Now we are going to jump into our final series of questions.
Okay.
And these questions require a bit of pretext, and it's also completely okay to say, I don't know, or pass, or I just don't have an answer, because they do require some thought too, and I did not
Okay. I'm nervous now. All right.
So, a lot of people have come on the podcast, and they've said that the catalyst that helps people change from having a fixed mindset, not willing to accept help and not willing to accept change, to having a growth mindset, being willing to accept help and being willing to accept change, the catalyst that helps people make that switch is a personal choice that happens after either extreme inspiration or extreme desperation. Do you agree, disagree, have anything to add or subtract?
I think it's inspiration. Am I allowed to relate a little anecdote to this?
Absolutely.
Okay, so when I was growing up, my mom, of all the other things that were going on in her life, was extremely shy, and because of her shyness, created anxiety, and it kept her from doing things that she said she wanted to do. And I remember when I was 14 having a conversation with her where she told me that there were all of these regrets that she had in her life, all of these things that she wanted to do, she felt terrified to do because she was so cripplingly shy. And I used my mother as a cautionary tale, as I have so many times in my life, and her dissatisfaction with her life inspired me to make a radical change. And I talked myself out of being shy because I think it was just her who had given me that label, and I believed it. And I decided to not be shy anymore, which sounds, when I tell people that story, especially students, they think it's crazy. But I actually asked myself, if I talk to that group of kids over there and I say something funny or I join their conversation, what's the worst thing that could happen to me? I'm not going to die. The earth isn't going to quite crack open and swallow me whole. What's the worst thing that could happen is that they don't react the way I want to when I walk away. I have nothing in my hand. And if I venture nothing, then I still have nothing. Yep. And so it made me just open my mouth, and I said something that I thought was funny, and they all thought it was funny. Oh, Marci, oh my God, you're so funny. We didn't know you were so funny because you're always so quiet. So I think it's inspiration.
Yeah, I think inspiration is the lasting kind of sustaining change. And then there's kind of a weird thing where some people get desperate and they take a lot of action and they change. And some people get desperate and then they just get crushed under the desperation. So I feel like
I've been desperate to put myself on a diet to lose weight, and it never lasts very long.
Exactly, because
the desperation peters out. It's not sustainable. No,
because the second you start feeling good, then all of your oomph is gone.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, why do you think some people, given the same amount of extreme inspiration or extreme desperation, make the choice to change and others don't?
Fear. They're afraid of failing. They're afraid that they don't deserve the good thing, or they don't deserve the success, and it holds them back. Self-limiting beliefs, as you said before. I think that's the number one thing. Other people have told them who they are rather than them having figured it out themselves. So they're using a false identity to envision themselves, in which to envision themselves, that then makes them afraid to move forward.
I love it. And you've kind of answered my next question as well, but I'm going to ask it just in case you have anything to add.
Okay.
Some people need a smaller amount of inspiration or desperation to change, and others need a larger, more consistent amount. What do you think establishes that breaking point, and can it be influenced?
I think the familial culture in which you come, which you come from, bad sentence, but that you come from, and the identity that you have with yourself, whether someone else gave it to you, like my mom said that I was shy, like she was shy, which didn't wind up to be true. I think that gets in the way. And I think that some people, it comes more naturally. I mean, some people are more courageous than others. And I think part of that may be genetic. Part of that may be, I don't know, it's a complicated group of factors. But I think a lot of it has to do with how we're inspired to move forward.
Yeah. Nature versus nurture, right? Like, it's just both of those components.
Both. It's really both, like I had this image of myself as my mother's daughter, as my grandmother's daughter, that was different. It used to be different than it is now. I started to look at myself recently as one more generation of women in a long line of generations of women. So I started to see how my great grandmother, who emigrated from Russia in like 1901, escaping the pogroms of Tsarist Russia to come to the United States, and the life that she led in Russia and the lives of the women in her ancestors led, all affect my genetics and the emotional culture that I was raised in, because each subsequent mother or each previous mother raises their daughter in a way that makes sense to them. So my great grandmother, having survived the pogroms of Russia, she came to the United States poorer than dirt, right in the middle, lived through the Depression, had 4 kids die. My grandmother was born in the Depression. She had 3 brothers die. like, and then she raised my mom, who wound up being sickly. So, the fact that my grandmother's brothers died informed the way she raised my mother, who was sick when she was a kid. And then that made my mom grow up with the set of anxieties and insecurities that she has and then had. And then she raised me in the throes of that. And so I feel like what I've done is being aware of all of that. And that's nature and that's nurture. Because so long, when it's that many generations, the anxiety and the trauma actually affects the genetic coding of our DNA.
It does.
And makes us behave certain ways because that's how our bodies are. So I think nurture are responsible for things, and I can't necessarily affect the nature, the genetics that I've passed on to my children, but I've done the very best that I can to end the intergenerationality of the emotional effects of the nurture part of it. So I'm hopeful that they have fewer things to contend with than I did.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. Sure.
It's a great perspective.
And it makes me look at myself with less victimization. I stopped looking at myself as somebody that was inflicted upon by my mother. Like, I don't look at her as evil anymore, or I don't look at her as malicious or malignant anymore. Yep. I mean, not that she was entirely. People are much more complicated than that. And she did have her wonderful, loving, and generous times. But I just stopped looking at myself as victimized and just as another generation in the family.
Yeah. Which is an important mindset shift, that idea from victimhood to I can realize where I'm at and take control of where I'm going.
Exactly. 1,000%.
Well, we got one last question for you.
Sure.
And before this question, I want you to keep in mind the avatar of a person who has a fixed mindset. They're not willing to accept help and they're not willing to accept change.
Okay.
So in Atomic Habits, James Clear talks about the 4 laws of changing your behavior. And the laws are to make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying. With that context in mind, and the avatar I told you about earlier, how can we, you and I, create an environment that makes it obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying for that avatar to make the choice that will change their life? So we're not trying to change them, because we can't change people, but we can create an environment that is more conducive to them becoming their best selves.
Well, I tried to do this with a student I had last year. He and his mom and I spoke many times about wanting to encourage him to change his behavior in his life. He had been from an inner city neighborhood in New York City where he was in a gang, and he did some things that were illegal, and 2 of his friends died in the process. And to break the patterns of those things for him, his mother moved them several counties out into the suburbs. So he moved into the district in which I teach. So he was sitting in my 11th grade English class last year, and he connected with me on an emotional level somehow. It happens. I become school mom for kids. And he said to me after school one day, he told me about his life and very vaguely the things that he had been involved in and wanted to change. So I think he is the kind of guy that you're talking about. He didn't really believe that he could change, and yet simultaneously wanted to change. And he knew that changing would make his mother happier and cause her less worry. He knew that it might save his life. So that was a big motivator. And he knew that he wanted to feel better about himself, but he didn't think that he was capable of living without the negative connections that somehow became positive connections, or that he thought were positive connections with the community that he was involved with. And he kept choosing the same type of friends or the same type of people to align with because they satisfied some need in him that he was unable to articulate and that we were sort of unable to figure out, because we also showed him how to join clubs or become friendlier in class with kids who might be better motivators or healthier relationships for him. And there were times where he was on the healthier road and then he just kept rolling back. And then he'd take 2 steps forward and 4 steps backwards. And it went the entire school year that way. He barely passed the class. He passed the Regents exam, which is our state exam at the end. But even in conversations I had with his mom at the end of the year, he still was having trouble staying on the straight path. And I don't know what else we could have done. You know, we were motivating him with grades on my end and my approval on one end, which does mean something to some kids, and his own mother's approval and love and worrying and anxiety and so on. And she was doing whatever she could on the family end to give him support and make him feel safe and allow him the freedom to talk to her, as I was doing on my end. We had the school psychologist involved, we had his guidance counselor involved. And even with all the support, he still struggled. Now, he's still only 16, maybe 17 years old. So there is a possibility, as a hopeful person, that he will continue to evolve. So we'll see what happens when he's a senior. It's a difficult time. You know, he's trying to figure out his own identity and where he wants to be. So I don't have another answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wish I could say, well, all we needed to do was this and wave the magic wand and woo, he was perfectly fine. But, you know, I don't know. If any of your listeners have the answer, they can email me, marcibrockmann@gmail.com. I would love to hear it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, when it comes down to it, people just have to make that choice, right? Now, I think the thing that kind of gets me, and I think Bob Proctor touches on this, so I kind of want to go listen to some of his stuff again. He touches on it, but he never like gives me the answer from the books I read. Maybe I need to buy his seminar or whatever it is. Maybe there's the answer. But okay. The 2 steps forward, 4 steps back, 2 steps forward, 4 steps back, 2 steps forward, 4 steps back is the sign of somebody who, like, you know, they want to change. And I've heard it described in a TED Talk too. It's the self-sabotage of like, talks about how your mind is kind of like, your subconscious is like an elephant and your conscious mind is like an ant, and the ant is on top of the elephant, and the elephant is walking one way and the ant's walking the other. So when you're consciously trying to change, it's like your ant is walking in the way of positive relationship, but your elephant is walking in the way of
that's a really good visual analogy,
the more negative relationship. So it doesn't matter how far that ant walks, the elephant takes 1 step and it's like all the way back.
Right.
And so it's really like, I actually think Bob Proctor does talk about how to change it. And he talks about like the law of autosuggestion, basically, which is like literally repeating thoughts in your head to like
affirmations. Yeah.
Affirmations to impress it on your subconscious. And then Alex Hormozy took affirmations 1 step further, and he was like, give affirmations like evidence. Say like, I'm a good person because I did this, or I'm a smart person because I got this grade. And then your brain will start to believe it even more. So I just thought that those are some interesting thoughts, but I agree. It's just, you know, you say people just have to make the choice, but it's like, that choice isn't like an easy thing to make. And sometimes
no, absolutely not.
Yeah,
absolutely not.
It's like,
and I do journal writing with my students every single day. And I put up quotes that are meaningful to me. It's all about mental health and self-actualization and figuring out your identity. And every single day, the first 5 minutes of class is responding to these things. And then we talk about them. And I'm looking at literature from a mental health standpoint. Why did this character choose to do this? What factors in this person's life caused them to do this? So I'm trying to teach them emotional intelligence while we're doing the literature that we're doing, so that they can get something more out of it than just protagonist-antagonist conflict. Because, you know, that's fun and great, and I love reading, and I'm an English teacher, but who gives a shit? You know, really, what are we getting out of it? why did this character do that? Why did Othello ultimately kill his wife? What was he missing in his life? How were the other characters able to act upon him to make him do that? And I think ultimately that's what we get out of it. I mean, that helps us get more out of it that we can then apply to our own lives. So it's a tangled web.
It's a tangled web. There we go. Well, Marci, is there anything else you want to chat about before we sign off?
I think we covered a lot of stuff. I guess the thing that I always want to impress upon people is that the only thing that's in your way from achieving your dreams is you.
It really is.
And get out of your own damn way. You can do anything if you want it badly enough, if you do enough research, if you put enough energy and focus, enough intention and agency, and enough boom, va-voom, whatever, like something, I'm wonderful, but I'm no special once in a generation type of woman. I'm an ordinary woman from Long Island, New York. And if I can do the things that I want to do, anybody can.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, awesome. Marci, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Tim. It was great to be here.
Of course. And if you guys are listening to this and you loved what Marci had to say, make sure to go check out her podcast, Permission to Heal, and check out her website. Follow her, interact with her, encourage her.
Website is marcibrockmann.com. Brockmann is with 2 N's. And all the books, the podcast, the art, everything's all under one roof. So it's all there.
There we go. And that link will be in the show notes. Guys, as we always ask, go ahead and shoot this podcast over to 1 to 3 people need to hear this message. Go ahead and give us a 5-star review on iTunes, and we're out.